Welcome, dear students. Today our topic of deliberation is emergence of humans and their crops, man as a hunter-gatherer. In this lecture, we would be talking about the emergence of humans and their crops. We shall also discuss the development of land, plants and people. In the current times, our landscape is dotted with farms, from small garden plots, marginal farms to large corporate farms. People's lives rely on farms or farmers for their daily sustenance, and there are only few places left in some remote corners of the world where people still rely on the very ancient hunter-gatherer strategy. These societies are now endangered due to the reach of modern technologies and even more due to deforestation. Anthropologists have discovered evidence for the practice of hunter-gatherer culture by modern humans and their distant ancestors dating as far back as 2 million years. Before the emergence of hunter-gatherer cultures, earlier groups relied on the practice of scavenging animal remains that predators left behind. Because hunter-gatherers did not rely on agriculture, they used mobility as a survival strategy. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle required access to large areas of land, between 7 and 500 square miles, to find the food they needed to survive. This made establishing long-term settlements impractical, and most hunter-gatherers were nomadic. Hunter-gatherer groups tended to range in size from an extended family to a larger band of no more than about 100 people. With the beginning of the Neolithic Revolution about 12,000 years ago, when agricultural practices were first developed, some groups abandoned hunter-gatherer practices to establish permanent settlements that could provide for much larger populations. However, many hunter-gatherer behaviors persisted until modern times. As recently as 1500 CE, there were still hunter-gatherers in parts of Europe and throughout the Americas. Over the last 500 years, the population of hunter-gatherers has declined dramatically. Today, very few exist, with the Hasda people of Tanzania being one of the last groups to live in this tradition. In the evolutionary time scale, the start of agriculture is recent, as humans started the farming some 12,000 years before present and started to gradually domesticate many plants and animals. These bioresources did not become the major source of food instantly, but in last few thousand years. In this lecture, we shall contemplate about the circumstances associated with the appearance of plants and humans. Now let us talk about rise of the food crops. Mostly our food crops are provided by angiosperms, which appeared about 200 to 250 million years ago in the early Mesozoic or Paleozoic era and began their domination about 136 to 190 million years ago during Cretaceous period. Angiosperms were the first plants to have the process of double fertilization and seeds enclosed within the fruits. This process provided the zygotes with protection and enough resources for establishment, besides the fruits attracting the animals for dispersal of seeds. There was a sudden and widespread appearance of angiosperms in Cretaceous period as evidenced by fossil records. There were dramatic changes in the morphological features such as flower shape, symmetry, arrangement, location and aggregation. Furthermore, among the angiosperm group, the dicotyledons were the first to appear, followed by the monocotyledons. The monocotyledons originated from the dicotyledons 135 to 75 million years ago. Both monocot and dicot plants have ever since undergone tremendous genetic changes to the extent that there are approximately 200,000 dicotyledons and 50,000 monocotyledons. There are many hypotheses related to the rapid emergence and diversification of angiosperms, and the most widely popular or accepted hypothesis is the simultaneous rise of pollinating insects leading to divergent selection as the insects and hosts developed a complex relationship. Another hypothesis points towards the appearance of closed carpels and self-incompatibility, which restricted self-pollination and enhanced cross-pollination, resulting in increased diversity and divergence of angiosperms. The challenge posed to the pollen tube growth by the closed carpel enhances the ability of natural selection depending upon the pollen tube's metabolic vigor. The closed carpel, along with the competitive ability of the plant, is a defense against predation. Besides, the genetic drift may have also played an important role in refinement of angiosperms via the shifting balance process, wherein the emergence of land plants and their genetic reorganization in new environments must have catalyzed the emergence and establishment of new and unique types. It is the rise of these angiosperms which provided us with most of our crops, and their emergence predated the appearance of man. The fact is that most of our food families and their close relatives were in the existence long before the humans began farming. Humans had no influence on the overall structure of the crop species except the size of the edible organs and the ease of harvest. Human beings consume a diverse array of plant structures, and at least 64 families of angiosperms out of 300 and 180 genera out of 3000 are utilized as crops. The dicot plants provide the highest number of crops, but most of the world is fed by only few monocot grains, that is, wheat, rice, and maize. Now let us talk about emergence of Homo sapiens, that is, humans. The emergence of Homo sapiens came after the long and slow process of change from a quadrupedal and arboreal existence to a bipedal grassland existence. These changes took place over a period of 40 to 50 million years as a chain of species emerged, evolved, and became extinct. The human ancestry can be traced back to the tree-dwelling primates inhabiting the forests some 50 million years ago. The monkeys and apes diverged into separate lineages 20 to 30 million years ago, and the first hominids appeared from apes some 15 million years ago. There were several changes which took place during this evolution of man, such as the faces became flatter and the cranium increased in size. Incisors and canines became reduced and molars became more massive and flat. Cheek teeth became less separated and jaw more interlocking. Forearms became shorter than hind limbs. The thumbs became reduced. Upright or bipedal motion evolved. These changes were initially associated with increased diversification in a forest environment, but ultimately led to the effective exploitation of the surrounding grasslands. The first upright ancestor Arpithecus ramidus appeared between 4.4 and 3.9 million years ago, which is evidenced by only few fragmented skeletons from Ethiopia and Kenya. Further, around 4 million years ago, Australopithecus was the first widespread bipedal species to appear, as evidenced from the fossils found at several locations in Africa and the perfect set of footprints from Tanzania. These ancestors were omnivorous, comprising small canines and heavily enameled molars, which could help them in processing abrasive seeds. It is not clear whether they were scavengers or hunted for food, but amongst their remains, many limb bones of hoofed animals were seen, which suggests that they brought back meat from butchering sites, which would have required the primitive cutting tools which might have been made from bones. The most famous member of this genus was a young woman called Lucy, whose 40% of the skeleton remains were discovered in northern Ethiopia, along with fossils of dozens of other members of her species, Australopithecus afarensis. The remains of so many individuals ending at one place are thought to be due to natural calamity, such as flood or some virulent disease or pile of bones left by predators. It further appears that numerous species of Australopithecus have roamed the earth at one time or the other, such as the gracile forms Australopithecus afarensis and Australopithecus africanus, that weighed as little as 27 kg, and more robust forms Australopithecus robustus and Australopithecus boycei, that weighed 68 kg. Most scientists agree that Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, is the direct ancestry of our genus Homo. During the 3 million years on Earth, Australopithecus species underwent considerable morphological change, but their cultural development remained stagnant. These southern apes were no better equipped than organisms of the time to cope with the vagaries of nature, and thus the invention of agriculture was very far from their capacities. The cultural advancement had to wait the appearance of their cousins Homo by about 2 to 2.5 million years ago. The Homo showed a dramatic increase in cranial capacity from the 380 to 500 centimeter cube of Australopithecus to 600 to 775 centimeter cube, and over the next 1.5 million years of Homo's average brain size increased another 900 centimeter cube. The earliest fossils that are commonly attributed to the genus Homo have been found in East Africa, Eastern Ethiopia, and South Africa, and represent a diverse group. One of these creatures was named as Homo habilis, or handy person, and the others were referred to as Homo ergaster and Homo rudolfensis. These were the earliest hominid tool makers, producing Oldowan tools, which were made by battering rocks together to remove a few flakes. These Oldowan tools were used to perform tasks such as cutting, chopping, scraping, and perhaps in defense. These tools suggest that they hunted of small and medium-sized animals, besides supplementing their diets by scavenging on leftovers and gathering plant material. They lived in temporary shelters, as evidenced by semicircular concentration of tools and marrow-bearing bones, and circles of stones that may have been used to support branches. These early people are unlikely to have had well-developed speech, but they had clearly begun down the human path as they made tools, shared food, and returned to a base camp. Now let us talk about evolution of Homo. The first widely dispersed taxon of Homo to appear was Homo erectus, which arose as early as 1.5 million years ago. Their brain was larger than the earlier Homo, and they had larger teeth and jaws. The tools of Homo erectus consisted of a much more efficient hand axe, which was modified into cleavers, scrapers, and other tools that could serve a multitude of jobs, from skinning and butchering wild animals to digging up wild roots. These tools have been given the name Aquilean after the place in France where they were originally discovered. Homo erectus was clever enough to begin using fire for warmth and cooking, and had developed systematic means of herding and slaughtering local large animals such as elephants, rhinoceros, bears, horses, camel, and deer. It seems likely that Homo erectus knew well the habits of every animal they hunted and the seasonal cycles of the plants they gathered. It is not known whether Homo erectus could speak, but their level of cooperative activity, particularly in hunting large game, suggests they must have had good communication skills. Homo erectus was the first hominid to migrate out of Africa, and by 1 million years before the present had dispersed throughout Europe, India, and Southeast Asia. Their increased body size and shifted emphasis towards meat eating may have contributed to this dramatic expansion in range. The movement into novel environments may have led to considerable population differentiation, as they adapted to new challenges may have accelerated the development of human beings. The earliest evidence of Homo erectus evolving towards modern people appears about 300,000 years ago in a surprisingly broad area across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Evidence is generally scanty, but at several sites, hominoid fossils have been uncovered that appear to be transitional between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens. The variability between sites is often great, and there is some argument as to whether Homo sapiens arose directly from Homo erectus or through other transitional species variously named Homo antecessor or Homo heidelbergensis. The first clearly recognizable member of our species, Homo sapiens, appear about 100,000 years ago. The so-called Neanderthal man was first found in the Neander Valley of Germany, but has subsequently been located at many points across the range of Homo erectus. Neanderthals' increased cranial capacity may have freed them for the first time from evolutionary change directed solely by external biotic and abiotic factors. They could not modify their environment and transfer that knowledge from generation to generation. Neanderthal tool making progressed to the point where stones were not only trimmed but flaked in what is called the Levallois technique. They moved periodically as whole groups to favored caves and campsites, where they made temporary shelters. Neanderthals left only limited evidence of art or symbolic, but there is evidence that they took care of their crippled and sick relatives and they buried their dead. It is not known how well Neanderthals' language skills had developed, but they had the clear beginnings of culture. They were the first hominid to adapt to cold climes, living in northern Europe during the Ice Age. Dear students, let's now talk about appearance of modern humans. The first evidence of modern Homo sapiens or Cro-Magnon people appears in 50,000-year-old deposits in the Middle East, and by 30,000 before present, fossil evidence has shown that these people were found all across Europe and Asia. There has been much discussion over how Cro-Magnon could have appeared so quickly in so many places. One theory suggests that our direct ancestors evolved simultaneously at several locations. This seems unlikely, as one would not expect such widely dispersed populations to follow such similar patterns of evolution. Another theory is that Cro-Magnon originally emerged in the Middle East and, after a period of local adaptation, dispersed rapidly across the world. This seems more likely than the multiple origin idea, as it identifies a more plausible single origin, and there is ample evidence that early humans could spread vast distances. As we shall discuss later, the entire New World was inhabited within 2,000 years of the first arrival of Homo sapiens in Alaska. There has also been considerable debate about whether Cro-Magnon evolved from Neanderthals or diverged from a common ancestor. There are numerous intermediate forms that could have been a progenitor of both, including what has been referred to as Homo heidelbergensis. It is possible that Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon evolved from a common ancestor in Africa, with Neanderthal diverging into a cold adapted European subspecies and Cro-Magnon becoming a warm adapted Middle Eastern subspecies. In Western Europe, Neanderthal appears as the classic form, with massive brow ridges and a compact squat body, but in the Middle East, the most prevalent types have more generalized skull features and in some cases appear to be intermediate to modern forms. The evidence for an African origin is not strong, but some very old fossils in Java and Africa show features common to Homo erectus, Neanderthal and modern people. Regardless of exactly how they evolved, Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal were very similar beings, and they coexisted for thousands of years. A remaining question about these two groups is why Neanderthal became extinct while Cro-Magnon succeeded. Some have suggested that the two groups merged through interbreeding, but there is no fossil evidence of intermediate forms in the late periods of Neanderthal existence, and the cultural and physical differences between the two subspecies probably made sexual contact infrequent. It has also been suggested that Cro-Magnon displaced Neanderthal by conquest and slaughter, but again, there is no evidence of large-scale slaughters of Neanderthal groups or their imprisonment. Probably the simplest explanation for Neanderthals' disappearance may be the two groups began to compete for the same resources and Neanderthals were the losers. Neanderthals would not have been the first hominid line to go extinct. The early Cro-Magnon strongly resembled modern human beings and had greatly developed tool making and art, but still no agriculture. They lived in large groups of cooperating families, and the sharing of culture was very important to them. As more and more was learned, it was stored in the human data bank, and each new generation was able to build on the previously collected knowledge rather than relearning from the beginning. Cro-Magnon were proficient big game hunters who lived in small communities. They probably had semi-permanent camps where most people remained and satellite camps where small foray groups would operate. They learned to make a diverse array of multi-piece tools of stone, wood, and bone. Antlers were gathered and used for a multiplicity of purposes. Among their food gathering implements were nets and snares, fish hooks made of bone, harpoons, spear throwers, and bows and arrows. They were aesthetic and spiritual as they buried their dead with ceremony and made jewelry, musical instruments, and statues and produced magnificent cave paintings. They also had sewn clothing, which ultimately allowed them to move into regions that were even colder than Neanderthal could tolerate. So, what led to this apparent leap forward in culture? It was not simple brain size, as Neanderthals actually had slightly larger brains than Cro-Magnon. The voice box may have developed to the point that modern language became possible, and this allowed the further development of culture. It is also possible that there were changes in brain organization that improved cognitive abilities but left no fossil record. Since Neanderthal had already developed the rudiments of culture, it would not have taken much biological change to greatly accelerate the evolution of human society. In fact, at Châtellerault, France, there is evidence that Neanderthal was using a number of tools very similar to those of Cro-Magnon and may have been making ornaments from teeth and ivory beads. The debate rages as to whether Neanderthals made these advancements on their own or were copying Cro-Magnon. Regardless, it is clear that Neanderthals' culture was at the threshold of modern human culture. Dear students, let us now learn about the spread of Homo sapiens. Once they were established in Europe and the Middle East, Homo sapiens rapidly spread all over the rest of the world. Japan was settled by 20,000 years before present, and Australia more than 30,000 years before present. Humans arrived in North America by around 20,000 years before present, and by 12,000 years before present had migrated to the tip of South America. When agriculture appeared 12,000 years ago, modern peoples were scattered over most of the world. Major Mesolithic cultures had appeared in Europe, Australia, Siberia, Greece, North Africa, India, China, Southeast Asia, South America, Mesoamerica, and Eastern and Central North America. The diffusion across the contiguous land mass stretching from Africa to Europe and Asia was probably relatively straightforward as people spread out in response to crowding and in search of food. Similarly, movement on to what are now the Indonesian islands of Borneo, Sumatra, Java, and Bali was unimpeded, as the seas between them were dry, when the early migrations occurred during the Ice Age. The further migrations across open water to other Indonesian islands would have taken the invention of watercraft, but were probably encouraged by the distant sight of land. The very long-range migrations across open ocean to places like Australia and beyond took much more faith, courage, and perhaps an extreme desire to escape crowding or warfare. The long oceanic migrations into the Pacific were begun by seafaring people from the Bismarck Archipelago north of New Guinea about 3,000 years ago and continued until 1,000 years before present with the settling of New Zealand and the Central Pacific Islands. These seafarers had their origin in Southeast Asia. North America was probably first reached by people from Siberia who crossed the Bering Strait on the land bridge exposed during the last great ice age. The first unquestioned remains of humans in Alaska date to about 14,000 years before present, but a much earlier arrival of humans is likely. The moment may have been enticed by a much milder climate than we know today. Once people arrived in the New World, they spread out rapidly, leaving fossil evidence all over North America and reaching the tip of South America by 12,000 years before present, a migration rate of almost 16 kilometers a year. It is also possible that some people arrived in North and South America by routes other than the Bering Strait. Ancient human skulls have been found in Brazil, Middle America, and the Pacific Northwest that resemble those of South Asians, Polynesians, and even African Bushmen. If this is true, some early Americans must have arrived by canoe from Asia and or Europe, hugging the frozen coastlines of North America to the beyond. As people spread across the world, they learned to use the resource available in each area and became specialized hunters and gatherers. In some parts of Europe, people were primarily big game hunters who followed a diverse array of herd species including deer, pig, cattle, horses, elk, and foxes. In other parts of Europe, people were more stationary, relying on fishing for the bulk of their calories. Along the coast of both the New World and the Old, people collected shellfish. Across broad expanses of western parts of California and northern Mexico, people became specialized gatherers of plant food. Hunter-gatherers in the Zagros Mountains of Iraq relied on a combination of wild goats, sheep, and wild cereal grasses for their sustenance. The stage was now set for the emergence of a diverse agriculture, one that was specially tuned to the natural resources available in each region. So, dear students, I hope you have gained significant knowledge about emergence of humans and their crops, man as a hunter-gatherer. I will be meeting you in the next lecture. Till then, take care. Goodbye.